Welcome to This Week in Family Law, the go-to podcast for busy Australian family lawyers who want to stay updated without the overwhelm. I'm Jenna Downey, a family lawyer and the Managing Director of Leap Family Law. Today I have with me my co-host Brendan Chu, who is back for another episode. How are you, Brendan?
I'm good. It's great to be back.
How have you been?
Yeah, good. Busy, but these days when I get home, I spend a lot of time with my pet bird, and it's recently learned to fly around the house as well. So it really just sticks to you.
That's very sweet that your bird now knows how to fly.
Yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
How old is your bird?
About 7 months now.
Okay.
Yeah, so getting there.
This week, we will start off with Law in Motion, and Brendan is going to talk to us about dealing with a client who uses AI.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. So today's topic is a bit of a change of pace from all the talk about lawyers and their use, or in some cases misuse, of AI. There's definitely no shortage of discussion about that topic, but having had the benefit of reflecting on some of the talks that I've listened to recently at both the Family Law Sections Intensive in Sydney and at our conference, it got me thinking about how hyper-focused we are as a profession on lawyers using AI, and how there's actually another side of that coin, an equally important discussion about how clients are using and in some cases misusing AI. And so today I want to talk about dealing with a client that uses AI. And so with how widespread the use of AI is now, I wouldn't be surprised if some of our listeners actually have had clients who've used AI in some way, shape or form, perhaps some more extensively than others. But for our listeners, in case you're thinking, oh, I haven't had a client who's used AI before, what I'll do now is actually maybe run through some examples of where AI is actually being used, perhaps where they're not even aware of that. So some examples are things like pasting documents and letters, draft affidavits, family reports, and correspondence into publicly available AI features like ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, or in many cases actually using embedded AI tools in things like Adobe Acrobat, where you can actually use the AI to summarize a PDF. Using AI to draft emails and instructions to you, particularly if your client's not a native English speaker, or perhaps English is not their strong suit, which then calls into question, I guess, whether those instructions are coming from your client or the AI. Altering evidence using AI. So, for example, image editing. We've all heard of things like deep fake imagery, or even altering documents like bank statements and emails using AI. And then using AI to prepare documents, thinking it will save them money, like homemade consent order kits, or you can draft a financial agreement using an online resource and then touch that up using AI. I know some people have had clients who have use those tools. And of course, my personal favorite, which is becoming self-trained experts on the law, asking a question to ChatGPT, getting a lot of information from it, which looks great, but is actually not correct or isn't relevant to Australian family law, given the nature of the information that the AI pulls upon, which is often American sourced. They start coming to you with questions of things like alimony and custody, where here in Australian family law, we don't tend to, first of all, we don't use that language, and our legislative regimes are much different from the stuff that they have over in the US. And the list goes on, really. And then with the core theme of AI is that the sky's the limit, right? I mean, if we can imagine using AI for that, it probably can be done, right?
I've definitely spoken to colleagues who have identified their clients using AI to help draft emails to them, to the lawyer, to give them instructions. But to your point, there's probably clients who are using AI in other ways which the lawyer isn't
That's right.
necessarily aware of.
Yeah.
And I also don't think this is a particularly new issue, because I remember in practice I would have clients send to me a letter that they've typed from scratch that they would just want me to send to the other side, just put our letterhead on it and just send it to the other side, which of course I'm not going to do.
That's right. We can't just be a mere mouthpiece.
Absolutely. But it seems like it's an existing issue, but AI probably makes it easier for clients to be able to do things.
Definitely.
Like
it lowers the bar of entry into that type of sort of instruction giving from clients, because it just means that it's accessible to everyone, right? Especially, again, those who perhaps have a language barrier, whereas previously they might have had a friend help them type that letter or email to you. They can just type it in their native language, ask ChatGPT to translate it, and off it goes as an email to you. So it's very accessible these days. But that's actually a good point, because that not only just impacts how you deal with your clients, but also it leads us, I guess, to the next logical step in this discussion, which is, how do you spot when AI is being used by a client? And I want to be clear from the get-go that not all clients use AI with malicious intent. Not all of them want to go in and use AI to alter evidence or create deep fake imagery or change things around. But regardless of why they're using it, I think it's important for practitioners to get a sense of, well, how do I actually know when AI is being used? And of course, I'm no expert on forensically examining materials for traces of AI, but I can shed some light on some things you can look at, and some of our listeners can look at, which may help them identify where AI is being used. The first one is actually reviewing metadata. So things like checking the properties of a file for the author. And often in some cases where AI has been involved, there will be like something in the footer that says, oh, OpenAI or Gemini or Copilot, something to actually indicate that AI has had a hand in the creation of that document. So just looking for those things outside of just the normal text that your client sends. The second is what some call voice drift or content drift, which is basically a way of saying your client's language and tone suddenly changing mid-email. And again, going back to before the AI days, when clients would often send you something, and again, you know that they don't use that language, and all of a sudden there's a big word in there that you don't know what it means, and you think, oh, did my client draft that? And it's the same here in this case, where AI is suddenly, it's very clear where they've started to use AI. And then all of a sudden their language and the grammar and everything shifts from what they normally send you to what the AI has written. So you can see that quite clearly. And to extend this one further, the uses of citations or references to research. So if your client is suddenly giving you citations or cases when they're perhaps not the most tech savvy and they were never interested in that kind of stuff, maybe they were the one who just sort of went along with everything the other partner did during the relationship, maybe that's an indicator of, okay, maybe this person has used AI to look at a few things, and it's maybe time to have a conversation with them about, well, uses and misuses of AI as well. And another one is what we call language markers. So things like US spelling, using Z's instead of S's, M dashes as well. That's quite a common feature of AI that's quite prevalent, especially in models like ChatGPT. And the last one I want to mention is probably the least obvious, which is just your gut instinct, right? If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, which is what I like to say. And so trust your instincts and speak up about it, or even ask a colleague if you're not sure. So that's probably another one there as well.
That's really good advice, isn't it? And I think lawyers will get a lot from taking those points away, and I'm sure they're going to take them into account moving forward as well. And if they had, what's your best advice that you could give to a lawyer if they do have a client that is persistently using AI and they do spot something? What would you suggest for a lawyer to do in that instance?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely it's a valuable topic of discussion to be had. How do we prevent our clients from doing things that perhaps could be damaging to their case, such as waiving privilege by accident or breaching the Harmon obligation? So there's a few suggestions I can give, and as with a lot of things in family law, preventing the problem is far better than dealing with the aftermath of one. So my first suggestion is to obviously have a conversation with your client from the get-go. It might be a difficult conversation, but it's a very valuable conversation about the dangers of using AI, sort of setting the parameters of the do's and the don'ts. What can you do? What can you not do? What should you do? What shouldn't you do? And one tip I can give about having this conversation with clients is telling them you're not banning them from using AI, but you're just, again, putting a fence around the acceptable use of it throughout the life of their matter. They can use it for other things in their life, planning their next holiday, figuring out what to make using the ingredients that are found in their fridge, but not uploading documents to ChatGPT or uploading a letter of advice and summarizing it through AI. So really, again, setting barriers, putting barriers in place of what's acceptable and what's not.
And I guess also explaining the issues with them doing that too. So
Yes.
if they upload something into a free ChatGPT, then that is breaching their own confidentiality in a way
Correct.
and their own privacy. So
Yeah.
that's an issue in itself, and perhaps that education piece could really help clients to understand
That's right.
the
Absolutely.
issues.
Absolutely. And speaking of that education piece, the next tip is actually providing materials to help educate your clients, brochures, you know, adding a component to your letter of advice to talk about the use of AI and what's right and what's wrong. Similar to how you would send your client the marriage and families and separation brochure at the start of their matter, which is mandated by the court. Put in some internal practices within your firm to say, well, actually, as part of that information package at the beginning, we're going to send them this little checklist of what you can do and what you cannot do using AI, and just broadly tech in general as well.
Yeah, that's so helpful.
Yeah. And my final suggestion would be to actually, for the lawyer to use AI themselves, because in order to be familiar with what your clients are doing, you need to be familiar with it yourself. So I always use the example, you can't learn to drive a car just by sitting in the passenger seat. You have to actually get your hands on the steering wheel. It's exactly the same concept here. In order to be able to spot where AI is being used and more importantly, where it's being misused, you need to be familiar with how it's used yourself as well. So
Yeah.
that'd be my final tip.
Yes, and that's not suggesting that lawyers should necessarily use a free chat GPT to help them
Correct,
do legal
correct.
work or anything like that. It's more so just playing around with it,
Yes.
getting familiar with it,
Yeah, yeah.
and just asking it simple, basic questions and seeing how it responds.
That's right, exactly.
And getting to know the language that ChatGPT uses.
Seeing where M dashes pop up, seeing where the American spelling comes up, using it to plan your next holiday, just like what your clients are doing. Like you said, not necessarily for legal work, but just being familiar with how it works, what its capabilities are. Perhaps put in a prompt to say, create me an image of a dog walking on a beach, perhaps. Just understanding what AI can do, because that'll help you spot where it's being used by your clients.
And following on from that, and I know we've spoken about this before, lawyers can safely use AI in their work through a platform like Leap, where it's not this open source AI,
Correct.
which they're then relying on to get information.
That's right.
Using tools within an appropriate platform designed for lawyers, it's very, very different.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
them.
And of course, another tip for lawyers in general about AI is making sure you do use a closed system that doesn't train the large language model that sits behind the AI tool on the input of the lawyers. So they're not inadvertently breaching their duty of confidentiality when they're using tools like AI.
Thank you, Brendan. It's really informative to hear from you again on AI. I know the first time you were on this podcast, you also discussed a topic in relation to technology and technology-related abuse. So I'm hoping next time you'll be on the podcast, you'll cover a similar topic. Let's get into this week's updates. What's up, Brendan?
Yeah, Jenna. So in late February, the Queensland Law Society released an AI checklist for law firms to help them navigate the use of AI. And that actually also came with a resource they can give to their clients, again, to give them some guidance about the simple do's and don'ts. So again, going back to the conversation we had earlier in this episode about giving your clients some information and actually an educational aspect of that to not just the law firms, but also the clients themselves.
Where did you say you found that?
That's on
resource?
the Queensland Law Society's website.
Okay, and we can provide a link to that in our show notes
Yes.
for ease of access.
Yeah.
Our next update is a media release last week from the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia, and it's titled Courts Unite Cross-Sector Leaders to Strengthen Response to Family Violence. It goes on to say that last Friday, 70 national leaders from government, the judiciary, legal aid, specialist family violence sectors and others at its 2026 Family Violence Symposium in Sydney convened and talked about these very important issues. They focused on 3 key reform priorities: addressing systems abuse within family law proceedings, strengthening the court's response to family violence risk and safety, and enhancing equitable access to justice for priority populations. It also quotes the Chief Justice at the symposium as he reflects on the court's commitment to adapting and responding to family violence. And he goes on to say, the family courts see the real and devastating impact of family violence every day. Our responsibility is to ensure that our systems are safe, fair and responsive. It's crucial that the courts continually innovate through evidence-based responses to family violence. The release then continues on to mention the importance of giving the opportunity for leaders at the forefront of dealing with and responding to issues relating to family violence, the opportunity to come together and to share their expertise with others within that forum and discuss a best way forward with a focus on the justice system. So I think this is a really important update and work that quite a few groups are working on together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great to hear that there's such a focus on family violence and combating that problem here in Australia. And it's good to see that there's actually cooperation from a variety of different agencies because it's not isolated to just the family court. This is something that everyone in Australia has to sort of band together and solve the problem of, because it's not, otherwise it's not going to go away on its own.
That's right. And speaking to the right people who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis and seeing the real impact that it does have, they're the people that should be speaking up and should be given the opportunity to be involved in this. So I think they're definitely doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
There.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction, I think. And in terms of stepping in the right direction, so the intensive series from the FLS kicked off here in Sydney, and we also had our inaugural Family Law Forum conference. And something I noticed as a bit of a common element between these two conferences was the discussion about the use of AI. And of course, I know AI isn't new in the traditional sense of the word, but what's new is actually the practitioners and the general attitude towards it. I've definitely noticed over the past few years where AI has been discussed, there's now a bit more of an acceptance of it, and also a bit more excitement about what's to come in terms of AI. So that's what's new to me, is that the practitioners, the attitude as a profession towards the use of AI has definitely swung in a more positive direction.
And having worked in the AI space for years now, it does feel absolutely right, like a step in the right direction, as you say, to have practitioners understand the benefits of it and have received the education that they need to feel comfortable with it and make the right choices and steps around it as well. It's definitely not something that needs to be feared or not used. And I think as time goes on, people are going to be more and more comfortable with it. And I think the theme of the conference and what is being spoken about at the moment is AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere.
That's right. And you would be fighting against what will eventually be the majority if you try to oppose it.
That's right. Our next update is from the Law Institute of Victoria. They, ahead of International Women's Day, have written an article which is titled "Why We Need to Balance the Scales this International Women's Day," which is the theme, of course, of the day and the event coming this Friday. And they've spoken to 3 leaders from the legal profession to share what balancing the scales means to them. And it's a really interesting read. And the 3 people that they've spoken to is the Honourable Associate Justice Catherine Gobbo from the Supreme Court of Victoria, Tegan Cochrane, the Executive Officer of Tarawiri, and also Louise Gibbs, the CEO of the Federation of Community Legal Centres. And I think it was definitely worth just mentioning that article is available ahead of International Women's Day, and I'm hoping that everyone has a nice event to attend to celebrate this special day.
I agree. And on the topic of International Women's Day, I also came across an article myself that was published by the Monash University about another way of looking at the issue of balancing the scales, which is actually recalibrating the structures at the workplace, which were essentially never designed for equality to begin with. So really focusing on ways to make it so that equality forms a core part of not just leadership, but also the work that's done by everyone at the workplace, and how that work is valued. So I think that's also another incredibly important aspect to look at this from. And it's another fantastic read as well, which we'll link in the notes at the end.
Thank you, Brendan. And that's what's up for this week. For your questions answered this week, we've received 2 listener questions, which I'll ask Brendan now. The first one is from Daniel. If AI tools make mistakes, who is responsible for this? I would like my team to use AI, but I am worried about accuracy, so I am hesitant about letting them make AI a part of their work.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Daniel. So it's a very valid concern. And in my view, one of the things that we as lawyers need to remember is that mistakes are not new to the practice of law. The mere fact that AI can make mistakes is not a new or novel problem that never existed before things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini became widespread. And so I want to answer this question by using an example of a common practice in law firms, which is getting junior lawyers to prepare the first draft of correspondence or legal documents. And in many cases, junior lawyers will get things wrong. But ultimately, it's the responsibility of the senior practitioner to notice these mistakes before the document is ultimately sent or filed. Now, think about a junior practitioner in your firm. They've probably made mistakes, and I'm willing to bet that you've turned around and delegated more work to them. You've noticed the mistake, you've taught them how to avoid it next time, and said, okay, here's now an email of what I want you to do next, right? You don't just stop giving them work because they've made a mistake. And I would suspect that most practitioners are in the same boat as well. So I turn back to my point earlier about the fact that mistakes made by AI, it's not new. But instead, it's something that we actually already kind of inherently know how to deal with. And so ultimately, it's the practitioner's responsibility to make sure their work is correct and accurate, regardless of who prepared the first draft, whether it's a junior lawyer or it's AI. Hopefully that helps, Daniel.
And I feel like we continuously say this, and I think it's mostly known to lawyers now that they should be checking
Correct.
their work. But you're right, the issue of mistakes being made in first drafts is not a new issue. And to your point before as well, I feel like AI is unfairly judged in that it makes a mistake and then lawyers completely don't rely on it at all because it's a lack of trust. But if you had someone within the firm, a human, make a mistake, then yes, you are going to continue to delegate them work most likely.
That's right.
And our second question is from Lee. What my clients want and what they should realistically expect are two very different things. I find particularly in parenting matters that one parent is holding the other to go to an unreasonable standard. How do you go about reality testing a client?
Thanks for the question, Lee. The answer to this question is obviously very subjective, but for me, clients come to us looking for support and advocacy. And I too used to struggle with reality testing my client, especially in parenting matters where one parent had unreasonable expectations of the other parent. I wasn't the parent of their children, and they probably thought I had no right to actually tell them how to care for their kids or what's best for them. But over time, I learned how to approach this topic of discussion by making it clear from the beginning that my job was not to just say yes or to be their mouthpiece or to tell them what they wanted to hear, but instead my job was to tell them the cold, hard truth, tell them the things that they didn't want to hear but needed to hear. Because otherwise, the other side would be the ones to tell them that, and they certainly wouldn't want to hear that from the other side. And I'd be interested in, of course, hearing our viewers' thoughts on how they deal with this topic of reality testing and how they handle these difficult conversations with their clients as well.
And do you think it gets easier as time goes on? I can imagine as a junior practitioner, when you walk into a conference with a client and then you try to have those difficult discussions, it can be quite overwhelming. But do you think it gets easier over time?
In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no, because as you progress in experience, the difficulty of matters you get faced with goes up as well. So, yes, the conversations you have with the clients, the nature of that can get a little bit easier, but also at the same time, the problems you deal with become more and more complex. So again, you're sort of back at square one where you're dealing with a very difficult conversation to reality test your client about a very complex problem.
Thank you, Brendan. And if you've got a question that you would like to be answered, please email us at familylawpodcast@leap.com.au, and you can also reach us on socials, including Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. We've loved being in your ears this week. Please rate or review us, as it does help this podcast get in front of more people. Stay tuned for next week's episode. New episode drops every Monday.